Hi and welcome to this edition of SpeakComms. My name is Matt Grant, with me is Andrew Hickey. Today we're going further on the trail of slippery concepts. We want to talk about terms that are used in everyday use, but don't necessarily mean exactly what the user intends them to mean. We have talked previously about the use of the term community, and we're talking today about the use of the term public. Now, public, we hear it all the time. The general public, in the public interest, public enemy number one. Public is a term that we use a lot. We overuse it, particularly in the public interest. And it's one of those things that I find that, like community, we use it almost in an unthinking, almost in an offensive.
It's a catch-all, isn't it?
Very much so.
It's an empty signifier. Again, there's that idea of the empty signifier, like with community, a word that's thrown out there that sort of captures all of these things. But it's until we actually come to pin it down, that's when it becomes a little bit tricky to work out what is the public actually, like community. Very much so, and it's something that's very interesting to me. As a former journalist, we'd use phrases, and everyone's heard this, it's in the public interest, it's, this certain person's in the public eye, but there can't just be one public. Who is this public? Yeah, well look, how do we think about this? And I think, as you've alluded to already, Matt, this idea that there is no singular public is a key concept, and just like with community, there's no singular community either. There's not this entity out there where everyone defines themselves as the public. It doesn't work that way. Look, there's some nice theory around this, and quite a little bit of social theory that's written on ideas of both community, as we looked at last time, but also the public as well. But there's one particular piece of work that I want to sort of draw on today, and that's from a scholar who's currently at the University of Melbourne, Glenn Savage, and he's written around this idea of public pedagogy, which is a particular field within education research. But in doing so, he's problematized this idea of the public. He makes a point. He said, look, when we think about the idea of the public, we have to ask the question about which public and whose public we're referring to. And I think that's a key question. So which public and whose public? He goes on, he says, it's difficult to see how there can exist a singular public in the public imagination. There's no such thing as a singular public. There's a whole heap of publics going on. Now, he has a little case example drawn from his own research work to illustrate this, and I'll just read a bit of this out. He notes from this particular chapter, Problematizing Public Pedagogy and Education Research, where this material's come from. He was talking about his own field work in two distinct school settings that happen to be in metropolitan Victoria, as it turns out. He goes, look, in the first site of this research, he said, big proud houses with lush gardens share quiet streets with green parkland, public recreation areas and good reputation government schools with strong tertiary oriented pathways. In the second area, the second case site, a little over 3 miles down the road, so geographically fairly close, damaged and dilapidated storefronts share a graffiti-choked landscape with run-down homes, large blocks of basic brown brick units, and schools with down-market reputations. What he's talking about here are two distinct geographic locations and also demographic locations. But the point that Savage is making here is that, well, how do we then understand those inhabitants of these two sites as being much the same thing? Are they, in fact, all members of the public when they're quite distinct areas? He goes on, he says, this snapshot view of suburban disparity illustrates the operation of concurrent publics. And I like that idea because I think that sums up beautifully what we're talking about here.
Yes.
There is no such thing as a singular public, and we hear it, as you've said, Matt, we hear it all the time in news reports, the public. Well, there's no such thing actually. A little bit of further theory to this from another Australian academic. There's no French theory here today, Matt.
I thought Savage didn't sound French, but
Savage, perhaps. But another little bit of theory from another Australian academic, Anna Hickey-Moody, no relation to me, but Anna talks about little publics. And I think that builds on some of Glenn's work really quite nicely here. This idea that there's little publics that we are all sort of members of in different ways. We might individually be members of several little publics according to where it is we are in life and how it is we're being addressed by the media. But the core idea here is there's no singular public singular. There's not this one entity.